It is early April 1945, and the once proud capital of the Third Reich lies under a growing shadow. I want you to imagine Berlin, shattered streets, the roar of artillery in the distance, the unimaginable weight of collapse sinking like a poison into the heart of a regime that less than a year ago still believed its 1,000-year Reich. In one underground complex far removed from the broken avenues above, Adolf Hitler sits in his bunker, listening to the shells, feeling every tremor in the soil. The moment when he truly knew it was over. Berlin by now is encircled. The Battle of Berlin is underway. Soviet armies are advancing from east and south, the German defenses collapsing retreat after retreat. According to the intelligence briefing, 2.5 million Soviet troops are closing in on the city by early April. mi5.gov.uk+1. Hitler's propaganda machine still shouts about victory or death, but deep beneath, in the bunker, the mood has changed. He can hear the shell fire, see the wreckage through frozen blinds, and sense that the mask of invincibility is cracking. Let's step back now for a moment and consider where Hitler is. Since mid-January, he has been living in the so-called Führerbunker, beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, a subterranean fortress of 30 rooms on 2 floors, designed originally as shelter for air raids. Historyplace.com+1. It is in this claustrophobic labyrinth that the final chapter of the Nazi regime will be written. The world above often forgets. He is not standing on the parade grounds, but trapped underground. His generals report defeat. His cities burn. His people die. Everywhere the tide is rising. For years, Hitler believed the German war machine unstoppable. But the spring of 1945 brings not triumphant victory parades, but collapse. Factories lie bombed, supply lines severed. Millions of refugees stream west ahead of the Red Army. The bunker is no longer just a protection. It becomes a tomb of illusions. Hitler's mental and physical condition decline. Historians note that by April he suffers from tremors, from the wear of years of conflict, from the weight of what he knows must be coming. So what caused him to know it was over? He sees his orders ignored. He sees young boys sent to defend the city. He sees himself isolated, insulated, cut off. On 20th April 1945, his 56th birthday, he reviews a group of Hitler youth for a final inspection, in a scene of absurd tragedy. Boys in uniform, undertrained, facing Soviet tanks. He thanks them via the Reich Jugendführer for their iron will. In that moment, something inside Hitler changes. The veneer of omnipotence cracks. He acknowledges, even if only for himself, that he no longer commands reality. Reality commands him. The regime is no longer driving events, it is being driven into destruction. And in that realization, the moment arrives. When a man realizes that everything is collapsing around him, he begins to make choices about how to end the story. For Hitler in April 1945, those choices carried all the weight of a doomed empire. Let's begin with his decree of March 19, 1945, the infamous Nero Decree, ordering the destruction of all German industry and infrastructure so the advancing Allies could not use them. Wired +1. Note the desperation built into that act. Instead of building for defense, he orders scorched earth. Berlin's youth are called to fight. Factories shut down. The nation is told that Germany must bleed to stop the enemy. This is not victory. It is self-destruction by command. In a prayer, Hitler dictates his political and personal will. On 29th April, he marries Eva Braun in the bunker. He instructs that his body be burned so that it does not fall into enemy hands. Warfare history, network +1. The marriage is a symbolic gesture, commitment at the moment of defeat. For Hitler, the act is less about love, more about control. Control over death, over his image, over the narrative of his end. This act signals that he knows the end is very near. Inside the bunker, Hitler's staff report collapsing morale. His once autocratic voice holds less weight. They witness Himmler, Goering, and others maneuvering, betraying loyalty. They hear of units dissolving, of headquarters evacuated, of communication lines severed. The world he designed crumbles. Reports flood in. The Red Army is at the outskirts of Berlin proper. The German Ninth Army is encircled in the Halbe pocket and shattered. Wikipedia Hitler reads the messages. He hears of mass civilian flight, of the city's fall imminent. At some point he must think, I cannot save Berlin. In that moment, Hitler's posture changes from commander to doomed. He withdraws further into his bunker. He moves from issuing ambitious orders to issuing final ones. His will becomes less about victory and more about legacy. He writes a testament, hands out cyanide capsules, prepares for annihilation. Historians note the atmosphere inside the bunker. The regiments of staff know the days are numbered. The world above knows it too. The Reich is collapse. But Hitler now knows it. He looks the abyss in the eye and realizes the abyss looks back. That realization is the turning point, from belief to resignation. The Führerbunker. Cold concrete walls, narrow corridors, artificial light, the sound of bombs muffled outside. The place that saved Hitler from air raids now imprisons him psychologically. By late April, the bunker is no sanctuary. It is the center of annihilation. Hitler seldom emerges. He rarely addresses crowds. He spends his time receiving briefings, listening to reports of armies evaporating, of capital cities lost, and of Berlin surrounded. The city's defense plan, Operation Clausewitz, issued around 20 April, defines Berlin as a fortress to be defended to the last man and last bullet. Hitler endorses it, but he knows the organs of defense are no longer in place. The mood inside is grim. The people closest to Hitler observe a man hollowing out, oscillating between rage and lethargy. One of his secretaries, Traudl Junge, recalls that Hitler refused to leave, said his body must only fall into the hands of his people, not the enemy. That statement itself betrays defeat. It is not a victorious surrender, but an escape from surrender. For Hitler, to be captured was worse than to die. Then comes the moment, the precise moment when he knows it is over. As afternoon drags into evening of 30 April 1945, the inner circle gather. Hitler has said his farewells. The cyanide capsules are distributed. He and Eva Braun retire. He locks himself in his room. There is a single gunshot. The world above is closing in. The great illusion has collapsed. The moment of acceptance is not a triumphant declaration. It is the silence after the shot, the burning of his corpse in the garden of the Chancellery, the failure of his forces to hold one street in Berlin. All those years of command, ritual, myth, discipline collapse into smoke. The bunker, once command center of the Reich, becomes a charnel house of what might have been. Now picture Hitler's internal monologue. I built this empire. I will not live to see it taken by others. I will decide its end. In that silent corridor, as the boots of the Red Army echo in the distance, Hitler's mask slips. He admits to himself that the Reich cannot be saved. That is the exact moment. Not the shot, not the burning body, but the mental shift from "we will prevail" to "it is done." While Hitler's internal world in the bunker consummates his acceptance of defeat, outside Berlin the catastrophe is unfolding in full motion. The physical collapse of the city becomes the external symbol of his regime's end. The Soviet armies have encircled Berlin. The Battle of Berlin rages. German forces are in disarray. The Ninth Army is trapped in the Halbe pocket, trying to break out to the west. Many thousands killed, many more captured. The city's civilian population is in terror, facing bombardments, mass flight, starvation, the collapse of order. Every bombed building, every shattered street echoes the regime's death knell. On 30 April 1945, Hitler commits suicide. The next day, the German commander in Berlin surrenders, May descend. Holocaust. The symbolism is stark. The capital, the seat of the Führer, falls. The man at its core is dead. The forces still fighting are fragmenting. For Hitler, the collapse of Berlin is not just a military defeat, it is personal. The city he claimed as his, the center of his world, is ashes. Now consider the message that goes out. Hitler's death is announced. The Reich's unconditional surrender is pending. The myth of the Führer is shattered. The external signal to the watchers, both Allied and German, is clear. The moment of truth has arrived. The Reich will not last. The external collapse forces the internal one. The irreversible sequence completes. In the bunker, the news drifts in. Soviet flags over the Reichstag, street fighting in the Tiergarten, young boys thrown into the line of fire. Berlin is no longer a capital, it is a battlefield. The last message from Hitler is less a command than a resignation. He gives orders no longer to win, but to burn his body, to destroy his documents, to vanish. His reality has changed, from ruler to corpse. And that moment, the moment of external collapse synchronized with internal realization, is the exact instant he knew. Not when the victory seemed slipping, but when the final hinge fell. Berlin cannot be defended. And with that, his reign ends. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere has shifted from grim determination to something quieter, like the air after a storm, when everything feels both too heavy and too still. Hitler is dead. Eva Braun is dead. The decision has been carried out. But for the people still alive in that concrete labyrinth, the story is not over. The end of a regime is not marked by the moment a man pulls a trigger. It ends when the myth surrounding him breaks, and that myth begins to burn the very moment Hitler's aides lift his lifeless body and carry it through the bunker corridors. The garden of the Reich Chancellery, once a manicured patch of ground belonging to the most powerful political office in Europe, is now a cratered wasteland of broken trees, smashed stone paths, and earth churned by shellfire. Soviet artillery has been hammering the area for days. Flames burn in nearby buildings. The air smells of smoke, iron, and dust. It is the last place one might imagine a leader's body receiving any form of dignity. But dignity is not the purpose here. Control is Hitler feared one thing above capture, above surrender, above even death. Being displayed, mocked, studied, dissected, reduced. He remembered Mussolini's body hung upside down in Milan, his broken corpse beaten by crowds. That humiliation terrified him. It shaped his last orders. If he could no longer control the war, he would at least control the presentation of his end. So the aides act with haste. They place the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun in a shell crater. They pour gasoline over the corpses, precious fuel in a city that has nearly none left. And when someone sets the match, the flames rise, but the fire does not roar. The wind blows. The fuel burns poorly. The bodies char and smoke more than they burn cleanly. It is not a grand pyre. It is a desperate attempt at erasure, and this moment, this burning, is symbolic far beyond the physical act. The fire in the Chancellery garden marks the death not just of the man, but of the myth. The invincible leader, the architect of destiny. The voice that commanded armies and moved nations. The self-styled savior of Germany, now reduced to smoke and ash. Around them, Berlin continues to collapse. Gunfire rattles among ruined buildings. Soviet soldiers advance block by block. Civilians hide or flee. There is no solemnity here, no tragedy that stands apart from the rest. The end of Adolf Hitler does not occur with ceremony or meaning. It is swallowed by the chaos that he, more than any other individual, unleashed. Inside the bunker, his remaining staff pause when they hear the faint sound of fire outside. There is no cheering, no mourning, no words. Just the quiet acknowledgement that the inevitable has now become the real. For years, Hitler's power rested on belief. Belief in his leadership, in his vision, in his inevitability. That belief dies here. The fire is not merely cremation. It is revelation. It strips away the illusion of immortality. It exposes the sheer fragility of the man behind the myth. The Führer is gone. The Reich is leaderless. But the war does not end with the fire. There are still soldiers fighting. There are still civilians hoping for rescue. There are still officers planning escapes. There are still pockets of resistance that refuse to accept the truth. That truth is now simple. The Reich was not defeated because the enemy was stronger. It was defeated because the vision at its core was always hollow. The fire in the Chancellery garden is not just the end of Adolf Hitler. It is the final admission that the world he promised was never real. With Hitler gone, the chain of command fractures instantly. Joseph Goebbels attempts to assume control. He gives speeches about continuing the fight. His voice is strained, shaking, frantic. He tries to wear the mask of leadership, but the war has moved far beyond words. Goebbels understands this more deeply than he admits. His power exists only as long as people choose to listen, and fewer people are choosing by the hour. Outside Berlin, German forces surrender in large numbers. Soldiers throw down their weapons, officers burn documents, civilians try to negotiate safe passage. The ideology collapses faster than the military. On May 1st, Goebbels and his wife murder their 6 children, then themselves. The bunker is now a mausoleum of belief systems that have consumed themselves. Without Hitler, without Goebbels, without orders, the Reich is a machine with no engine. There are still fanatics, yes, but fanaticism cannot hold territory, cannot feed people, cannot stop shells. Across Europe, the war unravels at a stunning speed. German forces in Italy surrender. German forces in northwest Europe surrender. One front after another falls, and then, May 7, 1945. In a schoolhouse in Reims, France, far away from the ruins of Berlin, the German High Command signs an unconditional surrender to the Allied forces. No dramatic speeches, no final declarations, no heroic last stand, just pen on paper, tired hands, lowered voices. Because this is what the end of the Reich truly looks like. Not a grand final battle, not a martyr's death, not a legacy sealed in sacrifice, but silence. A silence where the regime's leaders are gone, its cities destroyed, its ideology revealed as nothing more than power masked as destiny. Ordinary Germans now face a new reality. Not one of victory, not one of glory, one of reckoning. Reckoning for what was done in the name of empire. Reckoning for the millions who died. Reckoning for the world that was nearly consumed. The war in Europe is over. But the memory of what happened will not end simply because the guns fall quiet. History is now tasked not merely with recounting the events, but with understanding the psychology of a nation that followed a man into madness. So what was the exact moment Hitler knew it was over? Was it when Berlin was surrounded? Was it when Goering attempted to seize control? Was it when he married Eva Braun as the city collapsed overhead? Was it the moment he wrote his will? Or was it earlier? I want you to imagine Hitler seated at a table in the bunker, hands shaking, reports scattered before him. Reports that contradict every speech he ever gave. Reports that tell the truth he can no longer avoid. The army is gone. The nation is destroyed. The people are dying. The dream is dead. The moment Hitler knew was not at the gunshot. That was the action that followed the knowledge. The moment he knew was when he stopped commanding the future and began arranging his exit from it, when he ordered the destruction of Germany instead of its defense. When he chose death over surrender. When he burned his body to avoid being seen. When he accepted that he would not shape what came after. That is the moment. The moment a dictator becomes just a man. The moment history closes its hand around a myth and crushes it to dust. The lesson is clear. Power sustained by violence ends in violence. A vision built on supremacy collapses under the weight of reality. A leader worshipped as infallible dies, terrified of being seen as human. The 1,000-year Reich lasted 12 years. The myth of invincibility lasted until the door locked behind him in the bunker. The world he promised ended in smoke over a broken city. And history remembers not just the fall, but the understanding of the fall, because it is in that moment when the myth collapses that truth finally appears.